We are back, and I'm so happy to be joined by Jeremy Scahill, co-founder of Dropsite News and author of Blackwater and Dirty Wars. Jeremy's one of the best journalists working today. Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Great to be back.
Of course. So let's just jump right into it, because I know we're limited with you on time. This so-called Gaza peace plan, the U.S. has already kind of helped implement this plan to split the Gaza Strip into two since the ceasefire, which Israel has, repeatedly broken. We headlined it today that dozens of Palestinians were killed overnight during this so-called ceasefire. But they drew this line. Over 50% of the territory is controlled by Israel, and then a little under 50% is controlled by Hamas. And Israel had continued to enact its genocidal violence. It would kill anyone who stepped over this invisible line into the territory that Israel controls. But now the UN has kind of given its stamp of approval on this international stabilization force, another part of this plan Trump is implementing. Just take us through how we got to this point and why the UN's rubber stamping of this is a significant escalation, I would argue, in in benefiting these kind of private shady interests in seizing territory in the Gaza Strip.
I mean, the only reason there's something that is being called a ceasefire right now in Gaza is because of a constellation of interests that involve the Trump family business, Trump's relationship with monarchies in the Persian Gulf, primarily from the Gulf Arab countries. I think it's symbolized by the fact that the two people that were the emissaries cutting this deal with Hamas and Israel on behalf of the Trump administration were Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, whose firm, Affinity Partners, is bankrolled by Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Steve Witkoff, another real estate guy, whose son, by the way, right before his dad goes to quote unquote negotiate this deal, is running around trying to scare up new business for the family business, in advance of this. And the fact that, Trump really, I think he didn't fundamentally understand how the Nobel Peace Prize process worked. I think he was rushing, thinking that he was going to get in just under the wire to get the Nobel Peace Prize, but also the fact that Israel was losing the war. The only thing that Israel was succeeding at doing was razing Gaza to the ground, mass murdering tens of thousands of Palestinians, burning children alive in tents, starving the population. But the fact was that you had 20 living Israeli captives that were still in Gaza, and it was becoming extremely clear that no military force was going to get those Israeli captives out. So for a combination of reasons and the fact that Israel's reputation is at a lower point than it's been in the entire 77-year history of its existence, Trump decided, okay, we're going to go and we're going to make a quote unquote deal. But none of this was actually coming from a place of genuine concern for the Palestinian people or because Trump cares about Palestine at all. So just set that context straight right there. And in a deeper sense, because of the massive unpopularity of Netanyahu and the world recognizing that this is a genocidal serial killer masquerading as a nation state, Trump in a way rescued Israel's war of annihilation agenda from itself, from Netanyahu. But to get those Israeli captives out and to get the buy-in of Trump's business partners from these Gulf Arab states, they had to agree to some form of a ceasefire. And what they were able to do was ensure that Israel was going to be in control of more than 50% of the Gaza Strip. And in fact, Israeli officials are saying openly that they're building infrastructure in that eastern part of Gaza and intend to stay there indefinitely. Now, Netanyahu,
who could have seen this coming? It just, I'm sorry, but like the idea that this wasn't an open ethnic cleansing plan is insane to me, but continue.
Yeah. Right. And, remember, too, that on February 4th, when Netanyahu came to the White House to meet with Trump, he was the first foreign leader to engage in that kind of a visit in the White House in the Trump 2.0 administration. That's when Trump, next to Netanyahu, floated this idea of a Middle East Riviera in Gaza. And, Netanyahu seemed to be taken a little bit by surprise by it because Trump didn't say we're going to give it to Israel. He said it's going to be an American, real estate project. But what Netanyahu did is he seized on what he felt was the most important thing that Trump was saying, and that is there's going to be a Gaza Strip without Palestinians. And then Netanyahu started referring to that as implementing Trump's plan when he announced that he was going to invade Gaza City, the largest city in the Gaza Strip, and try to forcibly remove 1 million Palestinians from it. So all of these things that happened, there are some minor, let's say, technical differences or disagreements between Trump and Netanyahu. But what Trump has really done is set up a situation where they're trying to rebrand Israel's agenda of annihilation against the Palestinians as the greatest peace deal in millennia. Trump said it's one of the greatest moments in the history of civilization in thousands of years. And so what you saw then was the United Nations, and this was astonishing, Emma. I went and I looked carefully. I don't believe that there's ever been an instance in the history of the United Nations where it has done what it did with this resolution, and that is that they gave an international stamp of legitimacy, which, by the way, is a fabricated fake stamp, to not a UN deployed international force, but a force whose composition has not been made public yet. And by the way, Trump is having very, very difficult time getting any nation states to agree to send troops, but we can talk about that in a moment. But what the United Nations did is endorse the deployment of a military force with the aim of totally disarming the Palestinian people. It's not about Hamas. It's not about Islamic Jihad. It's about disarming the Palestinian people. What that means is that the United Nations Security Council has endorsed a stripping of the Palestinian people of their right to self-determination, which is enshrined in international law. And it says that Israel can participate with this international force in stripping the Palestinians, who they've been committing a genocide against for more than 2 years, of any ability to defend themselves from this genocidal maniac society that is pretending to be a civilized nation state. And it's not going to be the blue helmets. It's not going to be peacekeepers. This is so important for people to understand.
Right.
What the UN said is that Trump, as the chair of this horribly named Board of Peace, is the commander of these forces, and that until the end of 2027, it can operate under the banner of legitimacy of the UN without the UN having any command, any oversight, any control whatsoever. And I suspect that most Arab states, if not every Arab state, is going to refuse to send any troops. Many of them are on the record as saying that. Egypt just put out a statement today indicating they're not interested in sending troops. They're trying to get Azerbaijan, maybe Indonesia. Let's say they get a couple of nations to send it. They're not going to be able to stand up this force unless we use the M word, mercenaries. And so I think that what we're going to be looking at here is that they're going to scramble to try to find some actual countries with flags to deploy. Maybe they'll get some, but they're going to have to, if they're going to do this, they're going to have to overwhelmingly rely on mercenary companies. My colleague Sharif Abdel-Qaddous just did a story for DropSite last night showing that UG Solutions, the mercenary company that is affiliated with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which was this fake aid scheme where hundreds upon hundreds of Palestinians were killed waiting in line to get aid. That company is now recruiting for potential new deployments to 12 to 15 sites, they say, inside of Gaza. But a spokesperson for the company actually told Sharif on the record that they may also be playing a role in this international stability force. So what we're witnessing here is a neo-colonialist plan where Trump is the viceroy extraordinaire. It's been endorsed by the United Nations, endorsed by Arab countries. Russia and China declined to veto it, even though the U.S. had systematically vetoed all ceasefire resolutions up to this point. And the Palestinians continue to be murdered in increasing numbers. The Israelis aren't respecting even the terms of the ceasefire that they signed. They returned Palestinian bodies with signs of torture, organ removal. They're continuing to snatch Palestinians. So, none of this was designed to be an actual ceasefire, Emma. What this is a massive corrupt business deal, and Trump saving Israel from itself so that its war and agenda of annihilation can continue.
So so many questions here. One, in terms of the United Nations, the UN Security Council sanctioning this, essentially. There are comparisons being made here, of course, to the UN Partition Plan of 1947, which divided up Palestine into separate Jewish states and then put the Palestinians in a smaller portion of land. But of course, this is worse because, as you mentioned, these are not the blue helmets. These are not UN forces. These are likely to be private interests. And so my question there is, I guess, twofold. One, does the UN have an out in its agreeing to this if these like international forces choose not to step up and it's just these mercenary companies with Trump at the helm? Is that something that they can remove their support from? And two, like, what does this say about the UN capitulating in this manner, or at the very least the Security Council doing so? I know it's separate from the fuller body, but when the Israeli government waged an all-out propaganda war on UNRWA and their work within the Gaza Strip, they have basically completely bent the knee to the Israeli government and by extension the United States by capitulating in this manner. It's absolutely astounding because the UN, and you have the special rapporteur there with her assessment of the genocide, and of course like the war on UNRWA was unconscionable. Like that is a deep, I think, indictment of the body right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think someday we'll know the story of the blackmailing and cajoling that went on behind the scenes, but let's not give these Arab and Islamic states that endorse this too much credit, like they would have to be blackmailed to such an extreme extent. I mean, you look at this butcher and war criminal that Trump has just welcomed into the White House, and then he's, defending the murder of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi in front of the press and actually attacking journalists for having the audacity to ask about it, even though it was the conclusion of the CIA that Mohammed bin Salman was involved and implicated in that murder. But look, I mean, I think I just got done meeting with a wide range of Palestinian leaders from a variety of factions, both those that control armed factions and also Hamas and Islamic Jihad. And their belief on this, they're saying, look, no one is going to demilitarize or disarm the Palestinians through any kind of an agreement like this. It's a non-starter. In fact, even Palestinian leaders who ran against Hamas in elections and don't control armed forces are saying that they don't support Palestinians giving up their right to bear arms against Israel. So that's going to be a major point of contention. But I think what the medium-term agenda here is to create Bantustans within historic Palestine. Where you break up the Gaza Strip, maybe even to two separate parts, where the Israelis build so-called humanitarian safe zones in the eastern part of Gaza. They try to entice some Palestinians to come, saying, we'll feed you, we'll give you medical care. And the whole agenda there will be to keep them in a sort of smaller cage and then possibly relocate them or deport them to other countries. You have the single largest ethnic cleansing campaign since 1967 happening right now in the occupied West Bank. And then you have a bootlicking collaborationist regime in the form of Mahmoud Abbas masquerading as somehow the representative of the Palestinian people, when by some accounts his actual popularity is at single digits. Hamas remains, according to the most recent responsible polls, the single most popular political party in all of Palestine, not just Gaza. Now, people can debate that. It's for Palestinians to decide. But the reason I'm bringing it up is that if you want to actually negotiate long-term deals with the Palestinian people, you're going to have to negotiate with the actual parties and institutions that represent the will of the Palestinian people. And that's why before the Palestinians responded to Trump's plan, it wasn't just Hamas and Islamic Jihad making the decision. They met with every single political faction in Palestine. The only party that boycotted it was the party of Mahmoud Abbas, and they crafted their response. And what they said is, we can negotiate in a narrow sense an end to the genocide and the exchange of captives. But on these other issues, the existential questions about the future of Palestine, which are embedded within Trump's, colonialist plan, we have to have a democratic process to respond to it. And so that's the position of the Palestinians. But you will not find a Palestinian except Mahmoud Abbas that is going to even entertain the notion of disarmament of the Palestinian people, because to do so would be akin to a surrender. And the one thing that is true over these 77 years is that the Palestinians are not going to give up their rights, and they're not going to give up their struggle for self-determination and an independent state. If you want to get rid of Hamas and you want to get rid of Islamic Jihad, the Palestinians need to have an independent state. That's just a historical fact, and they have to have a military capable of defending itself, particularly against this serial killer that it's been mass murdering it for 77 years.
But that is the most important point there, right, Jeremy? And I know you have to run, but just the idea, why is statehood such an existential threat to the Israeli colonial project? It is because that would necessitate Palestine being able to have like actual statehood, like the capacity of a state, which would include having a military that they couldn't just call a terrorist organization.
Right. And Emma, I know you're also familiar with this history, and we don't need to go, deep into it. But if you look at the realities in apartheid South Africa, or in any other struggle where you had this sort of minority rule, or you had two sets of laws, the fact is that those are not sustainable projects. And if you were to have democratic elections in all of the territory of historic Palestine today, there would be a Palestine and not an Israel. And so the world needs to recognize that either we believe in democratic rights for all people, or you have to admit that what you support is something that is a narrow exception for Palestinians, that somehow these people don't have a right to determine their future, that they don't have a right to have a state that is reflected by a democratic process where people get to vote for their elected leaders. When the Palestinians elect the candidates the U.S. doesn't like, then it's siege, it's war, it's mass starvation. Palestine is a pluralistic society. It's a diverse society. Marwan Barghouti, who's sitting in a prison cell right now, has previously advocated for the so-called two-state solution. He's the single most popular Palestinian leader who is sitting and rotting in a prison cell right now, and neither Mahmoud Abbas nor Benjamin Netanyahu want him freed. But the fact is that if we believe in democracy, and this cuts across the political spectrum in the US, there's only one position that we can take, and that is that everyone in that entire territory, whether you want to call it the West Bank, Israel, Gaza Strip, Jerusalem, or you want to say it's historic Palestine, give them all a vote. One person, one vote, and let's see what happens, because that would be just.
Well, Jeremy, you'll be happy to know that I made this argument on Pod Save America last week. I don't know if it was as well received as maybe our audience might receive it, but one democratic state, exactly right. So
what's the counter argument? I mean, I'll go watch that, but what's the counter argument that, oh no, actually a little bit of apartheid is okay if it means that Palestinians might actually get to choose their leaders? Like, there is no actual good argument for this. Nations don't have rights to exist. This is why isn't there a German Democratic Republic anymore? Why are Soviet states no longer there? This is a fiction that we've been, had foisted on us. It's a total fiction.
Tell that to liberal Zionists.
Produces demographic changes.
Yeah, right. Well, we're banging our heads against the wall here, but thank you for your great work, Jeremy. Everybody, of course, please support Dropsite News and their essential reporting right now. And of course, check out Blackwater, Dirty Wars, and Jeremy Scahill's other books. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Emma. Keep up the good work.
You too.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.